Hi everybody, and welcome to NorCal Slot Car Scene. Today we're going to do a video that's a little bit different than some of the videos we've done in the past. Most of the build videos have been for cars that I've raced in Northern California based on the rules that we run and the wood tracks that we race on. Today, however, we're going to do a project with an MRSLOTCAR McLaren, and we're going to put a slim can motor in it. In part one, we're going to talk about the car and the process involved and the parts that we're going to be using. And then in part two, later on, we will go over the actual build and the results. How does the car actually run? So let's start with the car itself. It's an MRSLOTCAR McLaren F1 GTR, one of my favorite cars because it's BMW powered. And it's just a gorgeous car. So the car itself, because we're racing 32nd scale, looks matter. And this car looks good from the rear, the great grille work, all the details are there. When you look in closer, it has some of the nicest detail I've ever seen on the tires. All the lettering and the driver's names are very crisp and clean, and there's even some really good interior detail. So the car itself is a great place to start, and because we're doing a conversion, we are starting with the MRSLOTCAR McLaren, and this is the chassis that the car comes with. It's an angle winder chassis with a long can motor, and as I said, we're going to be converting this over to a slim can motor. If you're running on tracks that have magnetic downforce, whether it's plastic tracks or braided magnetic braid tracks, that does have a magnet. We're going to be pulling that out because we race entirely on wood tracks without magnetic downforce. The car itself is similar to most of the other potted cars that you've seen on the market, whether it's some NSR, slotted, and so on. But there are some unique features that MRSLOTCAR has built into this. And that's based on multiple years that Ernie Mazzetti, the owner of MRSLOTCAR, the experience that he has building flexi cars and 24 scale cars, and he's bringing that a lot of that experience to 32nd scale plastic cars. One of the first things you'll notice is there are 4 points for the axle placement. And you only really need 2. Obviously, there's set screw on the top and set screw on the bottom of each of these. But having the 4 points allows you to split the axle in half if you want and put a collar on it and have independent rotating front end. So that's an option that you can add to this, but the capability of that is built into the chassis. The MRSLOTCARs have some of the smallest bushings on the market, so being small is not a big deal, but that makes them lighter. So again, features that are found in 24 scale slot cars being brought into the 32nd scale market. One of the issues with plastic cars is the gear mesh is built into the motor pod, so the precision has to be there in the pod as well as in the gears. And the MRSLOTCAR series or line of cars has some of the finest gears that are on the market. And when you look at the backlash here, you can see that it's very, very little. So it's an extremely tight gear mesh and makes for a much smoother car. One of the other features that you'll find on the MRSLOTCAR is a little bit different than other slot cars on the market that use a 3 or 4 point mounting system. MRSLOTCAR uses a 4-point mounting system, but the pod itself is mounted centrally, forward to back. And that allows it to rock left to right, and there are 2 points on the left and the right side of the chassis that control that rocking. And so the movement now is down the center of the chassis laterally. And when you look at that, here's the motor pod installed in the car, and when you look at the rocking action or the movement of the pod, it's left to right, right to left, and the rocking of the chassis now, as the car rolls through the corner and the chassis rolls, the pod is independent of that, and it allows the tires to stay planted on the ground. That's controlled, as I mentioned before, by the side pod. You see the big gap there. And the gap is what allows that roll to happen between the chassis and the motor pod. And on the production cars, I don't have it in the picture here, but there's a small rubber boot that helps control that. They also make a suspension kit if you want to do that. We may do that in a later video, but on the wood tracks that I race on, we typically never use a suspension. So just the standard rubber boot that comes in the car is what we're going to leave on that. When you look at the inside of the chassis, because of that rocking and locking laterally, the mounting point on the chassis is rounded off, so it allows the motor pod actually to roll right on the chassis. So just little features that are brought over from 24 scale slot car racing, as well as Ernie Mazzetti's experience in racing cars for many, many years. Now on to the actual project we're going to be working on is the Slim Can Motor project. And this project, as I said before, we're going to use it with the McLaren GTR. You can use this with any MRSLOTCAR race car. The UOP Shadow, the car of the year from last year, can be modified in this way. And the reason for that is the car comes with a standard angle winder pod, but MRSLOTCAR makes a motor pod for the Slim Can motor. And there's some benefits to the Slim Can motor, and we'll talk about those as we go along with this project. The Slimline motor we've chosen for this project is by Professor Motor. And it's a 35,000 RPM motor, so it's going to have plenty of speed, I think, on the straightaways. It has a medium amount of torque, 150 gram-centimeters, so that should get the job done and make for a very easy car to drive because it doesn't have the extreme torque of like a long can motor. One of the issues with these motors in the past is they've had plenty of speed, but they just haven't had enough brakes. And Professor Motor has built this with non-ceramic magnets. These are neo-magnets, which increase the magnetic effect, and that in turn increases the brakes. So now we've got a motor that will be very fast, and as well you can get the car to stop. One thing a little bit different about these motors is they use a smaller shaft than the 2mm shaft found on almost all the other motors. It's a 1.5mm motor shaft, so you will have to get a different pinion gear for the motor. So why are we doing this project in the first place? There are definite benefits to the Slim Can motor. You can see here I've got the two pods assembled, the Slim Can on the left and the long can on the right. The long can is what comes stock in the MRSLOTCAR McLaren. The Slim Can motor with pod, gears, and bushings is 21.2 grams. I only had one set of bushings, so the pod on the right is the same setup with the long can without bushings is 33.1 grams. So that's over 12 grams lighter for the Slim Can motor. The people that are experimenting with brushless motors now have found that the motors are just as fast, but the added benefit to the lightweight makes the cars handle better. So that's what we're searching for with this project, a better handling car. It also allows us to change the configuration. Even though the motor is lighter, we've got all that weight now centered as close to the rear axle as possible. So it's a better configuration just to start with. The Slim Can motor is also going to have a lower center of gravity. Not only is the motor lower and lighter, so the height of the motor is a benefit to center of gravity, but now we can place ballast where we need to, if we need the extra ballast, and lower the center of gravity even more. As I mentioned before, you have to have a special pinion for this. It's a different size, and the pod is set up for 16.5mm spur gears. So when you buy the gears with any pod, you have to make sure that the diameter of the gears are correct. So it's a 5.5mm diameter pinion gear and a 16.5mm spur gear for this project. That's a quick overview of the Slim Can motor project with the MRSLOTCAR McLaren. I've been wanting to do this project for quite a while, and what really made this possible was the help of Ernie Mazzetti from MRSLOTCAR, and the fact that other than the motor, all the parts can be purchased directly from MRSLOTCAR. It's a really easy conversion to do. So in the next part of this video series, we'll go into the actual build process and get the car on the track and see how it performs. So thanks for watching. This is Jim Rose with NorCal Slot Car Scene.